The easiest way to sell Cape Fear in 2026 is pure inheritance. Say the name, show Javier Bardem looking like trouble in human form. Remind people of Robert Mitchum, remind them of Robert De Niro, mention Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg as executive producers. Promise that Amy Adams and Patrick Wilson are the new couple at the center of the storm, then let the audience fill in the rest. That strategy would probably be enough to get attention. But what makes this teaser more interesting than a simple legacy pitch is that it does not feel content to trade only on memory. It feels like it wants to marinate, to corrode, to make dread feel domestic before it becomes violent. That is a much stronger way into this material, because the original Cape Fear story has always been about more than a dangerous man stalking a family. It is about moral vulnerability, buried guilt, the illusion of safety, and the way terror can turn an orderly household into a psychological war zone. A 2-hour movie can hit that hard and fast. A 10-episode series, if handled correctly, can let it rot under the skin. That is exactly why this new version has real potential. Nick Antosca is not just retelling a thriller premise. He seems to be stretching it out until the pressure becomes intimate in a different way. And Antosca is the right kind of creator for that. His best work has always understood that horror does not need to shout to feel destabilizing. It can slither in through repetition, obsession, guilt, and surreal unease. Apple is openly describing this Cape Fear as a Hitchcockian psychological thriller that also engages with America's true crime fixation, which is a smart update if they can really pull it off. Because true crime culture has changed how audiences consume threat. We do not just fear monsters now. We dissect them, we aestheticize them, we turn them into content. A series that brings Max Cady into that ecosystem could be genuinely nasty in the right way. That is where Javier Bardem becomes the movie's most important weapon. Not because he is the newest Max Cady, because he is the kind of actor who can make stillness feel invasive. The teaser is smart not to over-explain him. It lets the laugh do a lot of work early. That laugh sets the tone. It is not just menace. It is contempt. It is the sound of a man who believes the damage has already begun before anyone else in the room realizes it. Once that energy is in play, the rest of the teaser does not need to overcomplicate things. Heart-shaped sunglasses, finger tattoos reading Lost and Past, slow encroachment into the Bowdens' lives. A sense that violence is coming, but that humiliation and psychological pressure may be even more important. Bardem is good at weaponizing presence before action, and that matters here. Max Cady should feel like an infection before he feels like an attack. Amy Adams and Patrick Wilson also feel like very intelligent casting. This is not a piece of marketing obsessed only with the villain. It keeps returning to the household, to reactions, to the dawning realization that the problem is not passing through their lives, it is entering and rearranging them. That is what I like most about the footage. It seems to understand that psychological thrillers only become frightening when they break the ritual of ordinary living. You need meals, bedrooms, family routines, quiet conversations, familiar windows, and trusted spaces to curdle. You need the home to stop behaving like home. The teaser suggests Cape Fear is very interested in that process, and that makes the series feel more dangerous than if it were just promising a lot of confrontations and screams. That slow poisoning of normal life is the point. The Scorsese and Spielberg connection helps too, not just as marketing gloss, but because it places this project inside a very particular lineage of American studio craftsmanship. The 1960 film with Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum was more constrained, more suggestive, and more tied to the limits of its era. Scorsese's 1991 version pushed harder into sweat, lust, religious mania, and raw intimidation, with De Niro creating one of the most unnerving villains in mainstream thriller history. This Apple series seems aware of both shadows. It wants the psychological terror of the earlier version and the more overt, corrupt physicality of the later one. The phrase nightmarish cocktail actually feels accurate. But what makes the series feel worthwhile is not simply that it has prestige names attached. It is that it may finally have the room to treat Cape Fear as a contamination story instead of just a revenge story. That is where television can do something the films could not. 10 episodes means this version can really sit inside the family long enough to let suspicion, secrecy, and blame mutate. It can track how the children absorb the threat. It can show how a marriage changes when survival becomes a daily calculation. It can let the audience feel the repetition of fear instead of just its peak moments. Apple has confirmed the rollout to 10 episodes to dropping on June 5th, then weekly through July 31st. That weekly model actually helps a show like this. It gives Dread time to linger between installments instead of turning the whole thing into a binge-and-forget object. The supporting cast strengthens that possibility. CCH Pounder alone adds weight to anything she enters, and names like Lily Colliers, Joe Anders, Malia Piles, Anna Baryshnikov, and Jamie Hector suggest the series is building a wider emotional perimeter around the family than the films had time for. That matters because terror works better when the world outside the immediate conflict feels populated and reactive. It creates more angles of damage, more people to unsettle, more spaces for Max Cady to poison. I also think the modern true crime angle is worth watching carefully. That could be the smartest update or the most obvious one. If it is just there as a buzz phrase, the series risks sounding more current than it actually is. But if Antosca really uses that lens to explore how contemporary audiences process criminal menace, how we consume it, narrativize it, and sometimes even glamorize it, then Cape Fear could end up saying something genuinely sharp about why a figure like Max Cady still holds such power over the imagination. Not just because he is dangerous, because culture keeps making room for dangerous men to become stories. That is an ugly idea, which means it suits this property perfectly. So where do I land on Apple TV's Cape Fear after this teaser? I think it looks like one of the stronger examples of a legacy property being rethought for television without immediately feeling hollow or algorithmic. Javier Bardem seems terrifying in the right register. Amy Adams and Patrick Wilson feel like the kind of couple whose fear can evolve rather than repeat. Nick Antosca is exactly the kind of creator who might understand how to make a familiar threat feel newly invasive. And the 10-episode format gives the series room to do what the films never could fully do: let dread become routine. That is what could make this version special, not bigger violence, longer fear. And if the show really understands that, then it may not just revive Cape Fear for a new audience. It may make the story feel nastier than it has ever felt before. So now I want to know what you think. Does this teaser make Cape Fear feel like a genuinely worthwhile reimagining? Or does the project still have to prove it can justify stretching this story across 10 episodes? And more importantly, is Javier Bardem the obvious reason to watch? Or is the real test whether the Bowden family itself becomes compelling enough for the slow burn terror to matter? That is the real pressure, and June 5th is getting very close.